Europe burns with the resistance as the Axis Empire crumbles at all points of the compass. In France and Italy, a well-armed resistance rushes to liberate cities and greet Allied armies. In Belgium, Denmark, and Norway, lightly armed but enthusiastic volunteers join the campaign. In Slovakia, a secret army prepares to rise up. All across the continent, a chorus of explosions and assassinations rings out. But even as the Nazi Hydra suffers blow after blow, it sinks its teeth deeper into the conquered lands and continues its bloody killing spree. And while she drinks her last gulps of blood, fear that the ogres of communism will come in her wake haunts the continent. I'm Spartacus Olsson. This is War Against Humanity, a series of World War II in real time. With the sheer volume of activity in the summer, early autumn of 1944, we've decided to split our coverage of European resistance in two. In today's episode, I will be looking mainly at Western Europe. Next week, I will return with Eastern Europe and the Balkans. We start in France, where the resistance sabotage campaign continues. By September, a British report will conclude that the resistance have destroyed 270 railway bridges, 1,750 locomotives, and have made 4,440 cuts to the lines. This has certainly disturbed the movement of German reinforcement to Normandy, but quantifying the separate impact of sabotage is difficult, especially as Allied air power is now more precise in its targeting as the Luftwaffe has been severely hobbled. The resistance also continues a campaign of industrial sabotage. Some of these attacks are more effective than others. In July, the resistance attacks 2 hydroelectric plants in the Ariège. The first at Cacagnères, they only managed to put out the action for a day. But the second at Uchman is knocked out for 2 months. Other targets include factories producing brakes, tires, and other rubber components for lorries and fighting vehicles. At an aircraft factory in Bourges, the resistance destroys 19 transport planes and knocks the plant out for the rest of the war. Other areas of sabotage, such as the assault on German telegraphs and telephones, have had a limited effect. But one area where the resistance has exceeded expectations is in intelligence gathering. By now, about 45 Sussex teams have been parachuted into France. These are 3-man teams composed of British, American, and French volunteers trained by MI6 and OSS who recruit networks of French men and women. A SHAFE memo from June 20th reads, "Although passing of intelligence is not a normal part of the activity of the FFE, much up-to-date intelligence has been received. This intelligence has covered not only information relating to the enemy's movement and dispositions, but also the indication of targets of value to the Allied air forces." The resistance supports regular Allied forces on the offensive with the Jedburgh teams trained by SOE, OSS, and the French Bureau Central de Renseignement et d'Action acting as liaison officers. In the north, the resistance supplies intelligence for Operation Cobra. Then, when Patton drives eastward to close the Falaise pocket, the resistance prevents German forces from destroying bridges, protects Patton's right flank, and deals with pockets of German stragglers left behind the lines. For Operation Dragoon in the south of France, an OSS captain named Geoffrey Jones leads his resistance fighters to destroy a German radar installation at Fayence on August 14th. This opens the door for an Allied parachute and glider landing to go ahead unopposed the next day near Le Mouille. But elsewhere, the resistance finds itself overwhelmed by the German military. This is especially true of the bands of rural resistance fighters known as the Maquis. They've proven themselves masters of small-scale attacks and ambushes in rough terrain like forests, hills, and mountains. But the Maquis are less successful when they try to seize territory and create fortified strongholds. On July 21st, Generalleutnant Karl Pflaum launches Operation Bettina, the largest German anti-partisan operation in Western Europe. Almost 10,000 troops deployed with air and artillery support go up against about 4,000 Maquis on the Vercours Plateau. I talked about the background to this Maquis uprising in hour 6 of our 24-hour D-Day coverage. The political discussions were long and complex, but while the Maquis firmly believed that they will be getting assistance from Allied paratroopers, SHAEF has no plans to send such a force. 4 German Kampfgruppen assault the plateau, 1 inserted by gliders near Vassieux and 3 others attacking overland. The Maquis fight fiercely and manage to contain the first airborne assault. But more glider troops arrive on the 23rd, and the 3 other Kampfgruppen break through the strongpoints and ambushes. That evening, Resistance chef d'escadron François Huet gives the order to disperse. The vast majority of his fighters will escape into the forest that covers the plateau or break out into the valley below. Those who are left behind face the wrath of the German mopping-up operations. These continue until August 15th and destroy 97% of the homes in Vassieux, 95% at La Chapelle, 88% at Maléval, and 76% at Saint-Nizier. The village of Saint-Martin, where Huet had his headquarters, is spared destruction only thanks to the merciful decision of a German officer. Resistance fighters are shot on sight, including wounded fighters recovering in hospital. After the war, the Resistance Memorial Museum on Vercours will estimate that 332 resistance fighters and 131 civilians are killed in battle or executed afterwards. Some of them endure horrific torture and mutilation. The SOE agent John Houseman will write, "The men, after castration, were beaten to death with rifle butts, and the girl disemboweled and left to die with her intestines wound round her neck. I saw the photographs later. They were unrecognizable." Over June, July, and August, the Germans and their French fascist allies leave a trail of dead bodies and burnt homes as they smash uprising at Montmouchet, in the Plan d'Eau near Marseille, and in Barcelonnette at the Ubey Valley. As the Germans are mopping up on the Vercours, the resistance is debating another uprising, Paris. Now, I have already covered the beginning of the liberation of Paris in the regular weekly episodes of War Against Humanity, and Indy, the actual liberation in his. But there's some elements that we couldn't examine in those videos, including how the tensions that have been brewing between de Gaulle's provisional government and the resistance finally spill over. Now, since June 1944, the resistance has, on paper at least, been under de Gaulle's control, with Marie-Pierre Koenig as the commander of the Unified Resistance Forces, the Forces Françaises de l'Intérieur, or FFI. But in reality, the resistance coordinating body, the Conseil National de la Résistance, CNR, disputes Koenig's leadership. Some groups, like the Communist Francs-Tireurs et Partisans, or FTP, are officially part of the CNR and the FFI, but in practice, they behave autonomously. As the FFI recruits more fighters, takes on a greater military role, and liberates cities like Toulouse on August 19th, the movement grows in confidence and challenges de Gaulle's authority. Above all, the Gaullists are worried about the apparent strength of the communist groups. These tensions come to a head in Paris, where the regional FFI leader, Henri Roll-Tanguy, is a communist veteran of the Spanish Civil War. Already, de Gaulle has ordered Koenig to stop arms drops in Paris for fear of a communist uprising. In the days after the railway strike on August 10th and the police strikes on August 15th, de Gaulle and his representative in Paris, Alexandre Parodi, oppose an immediate uprising. They believe that Paris must wait for the Allies to come closer because, 1, the Germans are too strong, and 2, an uprising will only strengthen the communists. But Roll-Tanguy presses for immediate action. In any case, their debate is overtaken by events, and there are already clashes on August 19th between the FFI and the Germans. But more disputes soon come. When Swedish businessman Raoul Nordling negotiates a truce with German military commander Dietrich von Koltitz on August 20th, Roll-Tanguy orders the FFI to ignore it, whereas Parodi does his best to extend it until Allied forces arrive. Finally, when Koltitz signs the surrender document on August 25th, Roll-Tanguy inserts his signature above Parodi's to emphasize the role of the FFI in the liberation. The competition over the signatures may be little more than petty jockeying, but when de Gaulle arrives later that evening, he's furious. In In the victory parade on August 26th, de Gaulle reluctantly allows the CNR leadership to march behind his generals, but he prohibits FFE men from participating. 2 days later, August 28th, he orders the dissolution of the FFE and its leadership. All fighters must either integrate with the French army or lay down their arms. None are more outraged than the FDP. With 100,000 men, they could cause a whole lot of trouble for de Gaulle, but the FDP take their orders from Moscow, and Stalin does not want a communist uprising in Western Europe to jeopardize relations with his allies. So the FDP disbands peacefully. De Gaulle also starts writing the patriotic narrative of a France that liberated itself with limited outside help. He begins to downplay the role of Britain's SOE by ordering officers out of France and sidelining SOE-led resistance fighters. Over the border in Belgium, the resistance springs into action in the days after D-Day. Starting on June 8th, the resistance makes 1,110 cuts to the rail networks, destroys 176 locomotives, and brings down 79 rail bridges. In one spectacular attack, they destroy a train full of aviation fuel in a tunnel north of La Glaise. The same sabotage group then blows up a German train passing over a bridge over the river Amblève. 600 men are killed, and according to an eyewitness, the next day the river ran red with blood from dawn to dusk. The resistance also hits German lorry convoys traveling through the Ardennes and launch an all-out war on collaborators. Data from the Belgian police shows that there are 74 killings in May, 110 in June, and 217 in July. And on August 17th, the resistance murders the collaborationist Rexist mayor of Grand Charleroi along with his wife and son. In retaliation, the Rexist kills 27 people, some of whom have no connection with the resistance. In face of this, Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler campaigns for the SS to have greater role in running Belgium. He gets his opportunity in July when the military commander in Belgium, Alexander von Falkenhausen, is arrested in connection with the July 20th bomb plot. On August 14th, SS Gruppenführer Richard Jungklaus is appointed military commander. Harsh reprisals and mass killings become the norm. After a successful attack on a German lorry, a force of 600 Germans burned down 5 farms and the church in the village of Oudremont. The Germans also begin shooting resistance suspects on the spot and transferring prisoners from Belgium to camps in Germany. But in the end, the Allied advance into Belgium is very rapid. When British troops enter Brussels on September 3rd, they are greeted by the resistance, who then play a crucial part in securing parts of the city of Antwerp the next day. The resistance waits to see if the Germans will make a stand in Belgium or retreat quickly into the Netherlands. As for the Netherlands itself, well, there is not much to say, at least for now. The Englandspiel, an effective counter-espionage effort spearheaded by the Abwehr and the Sicherheitsdienst, has effectively neutered the resistance there. Astrid has talked about this in Spies and Ties, so I'll keep things short. But between 1942 and early 1944, the Germans have captured 54 SOE agents sent to the country, and 50 of those will be executed before the end of the war. MRD Foote, the official historian of SOE, calls the whole thing a textbook example of how not to run a clandestine operation. By now, the British have cottoned on, and Major Hermann Giskes of the Abwehr brought the game to a close back in April. After a reorganization of Dutch intelligence and a renewed effort by SOE, some 25 new agents will be inserted over the coming months. Intelligence and sabotage operations will ramp up, and when Allied forces enter the Netherlands, they will be assisted by scores of enthusiastic but poorly armed Dutch volunteers. The lingering mistrust between the Dutch government in exile and the resistance on one side and SOE and the British Army on the other will cause problems during next month's Operation Market Garden. The SS are also cementing their grip on another occupied country, Denmark. Schaeff needs the resistance to make life as difficult for the Germans as possible, but unlike in France or Belgium, there is no hope for imminent liberation, so the Allies make it clear that now is not the time for a general uprising. The resistance works to sabotage railways and communications, attack the ports, and hit the electrical grid. Because Denmark is low on the list for RAF supply flights, the resistance is chronically undersupplied, and the results are not exactly spectacular. But either way, the campaign gives the Germans enough of a headache that the SS sink their claws deeper into the country. In September, SS Obergruppenführer Günther Pancke arrives to take control of security. He doesn't believe that the Danish police can be trusted and will dissolve the entire force. He will send 2,000 officers to camps in Germany. Across the Skagerrak, operations in and around the Norwegian capital are coordinated by the Oslo Gang, supported by Britain's SOE. This group is led by Max Manus and Gunnar Sønsteby. The Oslo Gang attacks the munitions industry, launching successful strikes on chemical storage facilities at Lysaker and Hurum on June 28th. The next month, they destroy almost 5,000 tons of oil stored for the Kriegsmarine's U-boats at Son on the Oslo Fjord. But the Oslo Gang's most public success is its campaign against compulsory labor. Back in January, Norwegian collaborationist leader Vidkun Quisling met Hitler at the Wolfslair in East Prussia and offered 50,000 men. The plans were leaked to the resistance in February thanks to a resistance-friendly secretary. The resistance believes that this is the first step in conscripting Norwegian men to fight with Germany on the Eastern Front. In May, as Quisling's National Samling, or NS, prepares to issue the mobilization notices, the Oslo Gang strikes. First, they destroy the printing machines, and then they attack the labor office in Oslo. The regional NS leader notes, "The action against the work effort must be considered 100% successful for our opponents." In response to this defeat, the NS begins seizing young men from the streets. Just like in France, there's a flood of thousands of Norwegian youths into the countryside. By the end of August, about 15,000 have also found sanctuary across the border in Sweden. The NS and the Germans then cut off the supply of ration cards to those who do not register for the labor service. Before the authorities can starve out the dissenters, the Oslo Gang hijacks a lorry carrying 100,000 ration cards. They telephone the NS supply minister and threaten him with the message, "Unless you drop the forced sign-up, we will not give you back the ration cards. It's too late to have new cards printed." The NS dropped their plans for labor conscription, and the resistance returns all but 15,000 of the ration cards. Far away in southern Europe, the communists seem to be asserting themselves in the Italian partisan movement. By the summer of 1944, there are somewhere in the region of 80,000 to 100,000 partisans operating within the borders of Mussolini's Nazi puppet state, the Italian Social Republic. Most of these partisans belong to the communist-dominated Comitato di Liberazione Nazionale Alta Italia, or CLNAI, which has little connection to the government in Rome headed by Ivano Bonomi. On June 9th, the CLNAI establishes its own military command, the Corpo Volontari della Libertà, CVL. Although the communists are the leading force in the partisan movement, the CVL is made up of a mix of socialists, communists, Christian Democrats, and blue formations directly loyal to the southern government. To control all this, the CVL requests a neutral leader, and in consultation with Rome, they choose General Raffaele Cadorna. And yes, he is the son of Luigi Cadorna, of the Great War infamy, who fought the 11 battles of the Isonzo River. Now, Raffaele is an anti-fascist conservative who commanded the prestigious Ariete Armored Cavalry Division and won praise from across the political spectrum for fighting the invading Germans in Rome back in September last year. Cadorna parachutes into northern Italy on August 12th and soon feels he has to warn the Allies and the Italian government about the communist dominance. The Communist Party, which gives the lead, does not try in the least to hide its intention of seizing the reins and setting up a regime similar to the Russian. They declare openly that they wish to lean upon Russia and Tito and will rebel rather than submit to the orders of the Western Allies. But fears of a communist takeover look to be a bit overblown right now. The CLNAI establishes several partisan republics in northern Italy, and most of these turn into rudimentary democracies rather than communist-dominated Soviets. Elections will be held at Montefiorini in the Ossola Republic close to the Swiss border and in the Republic of Carnia near the Austrian border. By the end of this year, though, these mini-republics will have been swept away by German-Italian fascists and Croatian Ustaše forces. The republics may be doomed, but the partisan inflicts serious casualties on the enemy. Field Marshal Smiling Albert Kesselring estimates that between June and August 1944, he loses around 5,000 soldiers killed and 7,000 to 8,000 wounded or missing to partisan action. We need to take those figures with some skepticism, though, because Kesselring uses the partisan threat to justify harsh retaliatory measures. When issuing orders back on June 17th, he stated, "I will support any commander who, in his choice and severity of measures, goes beyond our customary measure of restraint." The Germans are aided by the Italian fascist militia, the Brigate Nere, and I have already spoken about the horrors of these anti-partisan operations when I quoted from Ada Gobetti's book, A Partisan Diary, in one of my recent regular episodes. The looting and burning of innocent civilian homes are par for the course, but the Waffen-SS commits some of the worst crimes in Tuscany. The 16th SS Panzergrenadier Division murders 560 people, including at least 100 children, at Sant'Anna di Stazema on August 12th. Victims are herded into barns and stables and then machine-gunned or blown up with grenades. On the 19th, at Badine San Terenzo, the SS go on a 4-day killing spree and murder almost 370 people. These are just a fraction of the 2,000 or so people that the division will eventually murder in Tuscany. But in turn, the partisans are able to inflict serious defeats on the Germans when they coordinate their actions with Allied forces. Their greatest victory of the summer is the liberation of Florence in mid-August. The bells ring out at dawn on August 11th, and some 3,000 or so partisans rise up and take on German forces. They fight side by side with Allied troops to liberate the city. As Florence and Paris bask in the glow of liberation, over in Central Europe, the Slovak resistance launches its uprising. Now, Indy's covered the military engagements in his episode, but there's some resistance backstory that needs covering. At Christmas 1943, an alliance of communists, social democrats, nationalists, and army officers formed the Slovak National Council. Their objective was the re-establishment of a united Czechoslovakia and the restoration of democracy under exiled Prime Minister Edvard Beneš. Since March, they've been planning options for the overthrow of the clerical fascist regime. The National Council are relying on the Soviets. The plan is to hold up on the Dukla Pass and allow Soviet troops into Slovakia. But the truth is that Moscow doesn't want an uprising under the leadership of the Western-friendly Slovak National Council. Instead, Moscow has been building up its own force in Slovakia. By now, there are about 8,000 or so Soviet-trained partisans operating in the center and north of the country. They take their orders solely from the Ukrainian partisan staff based in Kiev. As Indy explained, it is these Soviet-controlled partisans who eventually kick things off. On August 27th, they intercept a train carrying the German military mission back from newly defected Romania. The partisans execute all 28 members, and in the aftermath, Tiso grants permission for German troops to enter the country on August 29th. The National Council sees no choice but to launch the uprising that evening. I will follow up on this story in the regular episodes of War Against Humanity as the Slovak insurgents and the Soviet partisans face off against the Waffen-SS, Wehrmacht, and troops loyal to Tiso's republic. But just like in Warsaw, the uprising will be hamstrung by a diplomatic row between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. Although Stalin had promised help back in December 1943, he is reluctant to provide more than limited support to what he sees as an Allied interference in Moscow's future sphere of influence. It is a pattern that we have seen and will continue to see throughout this war. As cities across Europe continue to rise up against Axis occupation, the splits between the Western powers and the Soviet Union play out in the battles in the streets and in the diplomatic cables that flit between London, Washington, Moscow, and Paris. For now, the joy of liberation is the story of the day in the world's newspapers. But behind this facade, there is a sinister political mood, a mood which grows with the resistance events and gradually begins to shift the war against humanity towards a new conflict against the backdrop of murder and retribution, meted out by both occupier and liberator in cities across the continent. The growth of powerful communist movements in parts of Western and particularly Southern Europe, and the fear in Western capitals of Stalin's ambitions for Soviet domination of Eastern and Central Europe. Back in September 1939, the lights went out over Europe. Now they are lighting up once again. But even as the shadows of Nazi rule are lifted, there is darkness on the horizon once more. On the heels of the Axis storm, winter is coming. Never forget.